Hey everybody, welcome to BDO's webinar on Agile and DevOps for continuous delivery. We'll just give it a minute or so for our attendees for everyone to log in, and then we'll get started. As we sort of kick off, we'll just do some bit of housekeeping on how this webinar will roll through. It's on GoToMeeting, so you can submit questions in the chat box. So you'll see the screenshot there of how to do that. I'll see them come through, and we can answer a few as we go if that sort of ties into our sort of flow. But we'll also have a Q&A section at the end of this where we can answer any other things as well. There's a little support tab there if you've got any technical issues. And then post webinar, there'll be like a little a follow-up email with the slides that we talked to today, and also some links to where you can get this webinar and also the future ones as part of this Nextgen tech series that BDO is running. So we'll jump into just what we're going to talk about today. It's broadly across Agile. We'll dive into some talk about DevOps and the differences there, and then we'll jump into tooling and technology, and then a bit of time at the end for Q&A. We'll keep this under the hour. It's lunchtime, so you may need to jump to things at 1. So, but plenty to talk about. I'd like to introduce the team. Firstly, I'll be moderating. I'm Ryan from the Digital and Tech Advisory team. At BDO, we do a lot of work with clients deploying technology solutions, systems, changes, and that's done in an agile fashion. So it'd be great to sort of talk through some of these experiences with the panel today. And I've got some great insights from Warren, if you want to give yourself a little intro.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Warren Jones. I'm a product specialist within Atlassian, working on the Jira Line platform. If you're not familiar with Jira Line, it provides an ability to scale your agile development. So it allows you to sort of have visibility and transparency over what's going on at the team level and being able to aggregate that at the higher levels of the organization. So it really allows you to connect your execution to your overall strategy. Been working in the software vendor sort of field for most of my career, which you probably tell from the grey hair is quite a bit of time. But worked in a number of different roles, including development manager, product owner, a product manager, Scrum Master, and more recently in the sort of sales side of things as a product specialist. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Warren. Trent.
Just on myself off mute. Hi everyone, I'm Trent Mason. I'm our practice lead for Centify, looking after all things Agile for our coaching and consulting company. We do a lot of work with organisations on their transformation and evolution journeys in terms of Agile, and I guess have a real passion and desire to help organisations with their culture and people through these Agile evolutions.
Great, thank you, Trent. And Sean.
Hi all, my name's Sean. I guess I spent the earlier part of my tech career as a full stack web developer, a lot of web applications and kind of managing that stack from front end to back end. And now in my latter part of the technical career, I'm doing digital forensics, which is a lot of implementation of technical solutions, typically in the regulatory and financial services space.
Awesome, thank you, Sean. So let's jump into it, and as we get into the Agile, we've got a couple of polls today just to get a view of where our audience is on their Agile journey. So we'll just pop up a poll here to get your feedback on your Agile journey, recognizing that that's probably in different stages for a number of you, but whether you're still working on what your Agile strategy may look like for your business or organization, or maybe you already have Agile running within your tech teams, and that's certainly a common structure and setup that really comes to the roots of Agile, being born in sort of software development. So that's certainly not uncommon. But then I guess the third option there is, whether you've scaled or are scaling Agile across your organization, and that's certainly the last few years where we've seen some very broader approaches to going, okay, this is a framework and a practice and set of principles that really does work in the technology area, and it's being applied to the broader organization. So a few options there. So we've got just from the poll results, so it's basically a bit of a mix here, some at the beginning and some have Agile in their tech teams, and no responses on the scaling yet. So cool, I think this will just help us inform some of the questions, some of the answers, I guess, from the panel as we dive in. I want to start, Warren, on Agile and what it is really at the top here, and why an organization should adopt an Agile strategy.
Yeah, okay. So look, big, broad question, I guess, but if we talk about what Agile is, and it seems like based on the polling responses, most people would have a pretty good feel about what Agile is. So let me not sort of school you too much on that, but just talk about the broad terms. The first thing is Agile in itself is really just an umbrella term. It's always interesting when people sort of say, we're going Agile or we're doing Agile. It's really a matter of what does that mean from your perspective? And that'll mean different things for different people based on their roles and responsibilities and where they sit in the organization. So at the end of the day, any practice or principle, as you mentioned before there, Ryan, that aligns to the Agile Manifesto, which is basically the manifesto that was set out by some key, leading figures in the software industry back in 2001, really comes under that banner of Agile. So when we're talking about what are some of those practices, what are some of those frameworks or processes, we're really talking about things like Scrum, which is probably the most obvious one to most of us, which is really around that software development side of things and being able to deliver it on an iterative basis. We're talking about things like Kanban. We're talking about, from a scaling perspective, we might be talking about Scale Agile Framework or SAFe. We might be talking about extreme programming, TDD, these types of things all fit under that banner. So always important to know that Agile is a very broad term, and there's lots of things that provide value potentially to your organization that fit under that. I think we saw from the polling response too that most people have gone down the path of adopting some Agile practices. So I think it's pretty well accepted in the industry today, that in the organizations today, that we should be moving in that direction. It's around really being very much iterative in our development. It's around being very focused on the value that the work that we're doing represents to our customers. And it's around, from a leadership perspective, being very much a servant leader and being very much focused on teamwork and collaboration amongst the team. So they're the sort of key things that I would call out in terms of that. Again, pointing my grey hair, I think I can think back to what it was 20 or 30 years ago, where we set off on a project and spent the next 12, 18 months working towards that endeavour. When we look at the landscape that we're playing today, we can't wait 18 months to deliver value to our customers. That's not going to be something that's going to work in today's environment, where we have this very sort of steep, adoption curve, and just a steep, end of life sort of curve occurring with most in most areas of markets today.
And do you think like those benefits that those Agile practices and mindset and however those different flavors that apply, do you think that's why we're seeing interest, I guess, from people at the top, leaders at organizations thinking around Agile in the broader context? Maybe I'll just pop up a slide as well, which sort of talks to this, and that might help frame the discussion. That's wrong slide. There we go. This some people may be familiar. There's a seminal book, I think, from Stephen Denning called The Age of Agile, and maybe you can talk about this sort of shift of sort of a classic organization structure to now, some of those things you're talking about that relate to sort of agile practices, principles that came from the manifesto, and how they're sort of applying now at an organizational context?
Yeah, look, I think when we look at the slide that you've got up there at the moment, we sort of see how our organisations used to be, and it was very sort of, I guess, a dictatorship where the information would be pushed down, and the people who are actually delivering the work, didn't necessarily understand why they were doing things. I think as we move towards being a more an agile organisation, we have much more awareness at that team level of what we're actually trying to achieve. And that can only be a positive thing. If we understand what we're trying to do, from the business, what the business value is that's represented by the work that we're doing, then we're going to be much better in a much better position to deliver against those against those outcomes. So I think that's one of the fundamental things that's happening. It's more about giving autonomy to our teams, understanding that they have a lot of knowledge to bring to the table, and if we set them on the right sort of, I guess, objectives from a business perspective, then we can get much better outcomes.
And I think talking to that, might just keep this up for a sec because I want to get you to jump in here, Trent. Talking to that people and culture point here, and we've got this sort of this circle here around managers, teams, customers. What's the importance of sort of people and culture, I guess, in a successful agile initiative or adoption as a strategy for an organization?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it builds off the back of what Warren has said. And I guess what we're starting to see a lot more of now is the organizations that are doing this well are really starting to bring into and understanding the focus of their culture and what it looks like, and starting to approach their agile journeys with a bit more empathy, and also understanding what their strengths are. So it's not just about going, oh, here's this framework and we're just going to smash it onto people and go, we're now going agile. They're sort of really looking at going, what's the culture within our organization, and what do we do well, and how do we start being transparent and open with our people about this is what we're going to be going through over the next 3, 5, 10 years, and this is what it's going to feel like on the ground, and this is how we're going to support you. And really, I guess, getting that understanding of going, okay, we know what we do well. We're not going to throw out everything that you already know and things that you guys do well. We're going to use that as part of our strengths, and we're going to be empathetic to this cause and look at how we can actually work with you to do business better and delight our customers and our employees and engage each other better.
And do you think that is in the terms of a particular framework, or it sort of very contextual to the organization itself on how they go about doing that, whether it's come from the top down or one area of the business in particular?
Yeah, look, I think the biggest thing is it shouldn't be framework specific. It should be more about transparency and openness between what's our vision and where we're going and why do we want to go there. And you're bought in and you're part of this journey as well. Whatever that framework might be, or whatever this journey is going to look like, we're going to be on it together, and it's going to be messy, and we're going to learn things, and it's going to be different. But we're either choosing to go this path and it's a framework because A, B, C, and D, and let's look at why we want to do that and what we'll do when things don't go well, or we're trying this bottom up culture bubble approach, and we'll see how that filters and percolates up through, and we'll learn and iterate from there. As Warren sort of mentioned, that iterative approach to everything, not just with inside your little Scrum framework or your Kanban framework.
And do you think, one thing we often see with any kind of transformation, I guess, whether that's sort of digital or other sort of practices, like things go wrong, things don't go to plan. What do you see often that may, some of those things that don't work, and or things to look out for, I guess, as organizations might be going through this kind of change?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest one that I see quite often is a reversion to type, so to speak. So when this starts to become difficult and is different to what people know, and things start to not go as they necessarily intended, there's a want to go back to what we know and what we're comfortable with, and that can sometimes derail or be a bit of a speed hump in the journey when that that feeling of losing control then has a ripple effect to go, we need to grab control back. And it's like pulling into the spiral dive rather than sort of, letting the aircraft stabilize itself and find out what it needs to do. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is that wanting to revert to what we know and really trying to grasp control again.
Yeah, so how do you deal with that, I guess, like where things may, someone's not happy with the speed of delivery or outcomes they're getting, and yeah, it's kind of that human behavior to revert to kind of controlling everything and planning everything that may give that sense of steadiness now, but sort of goes against some of the original principles. Like, how do you then deal with that to not do that?
Yeah, and I think that's therein lies the critical question. And I think a lot of it's about leadership and about the support that we're providing for people throughout those transformations and journeys, and I guess those expectations of what we're going to expect from people, and creating that safe space where they can say, this feels uncomfortable, this isn't what I imagined this was going to be like. What's happening? How do we resolve this? And it's looking to industry, looking to external sources where they're going to be able to provide some of that support and go, okay, this is what it's going to feel like, and this is how we support you through that.
Yeah, cool. And I think to get you to jump in here, Sean, we've talked around some of the roots of Agile being in sort of software development and I guess the tech space more generally, but we're seeing this sort of trend beyond those teams. Like, how are you seeing the relevancy in organizations of Agile practices and mindset in the rest of an organization?
Yeah, I think it provides a good framework, and as Warren mentioned, it's more an abstract kind of a philosophy of how you're going to approach certain problems. And none of us have actually really gone that deep into any kind of IT thing at the moment, and that is because it is a philosophy that helps with this kind of problem solving. We've kind of mentioned Scrum, which is like an implementation of how to do this, and I find that running through or using Scrum for non-IT teams actually helps with a lot of projects, and usually what I've seen is it's used to start on one particular project, and then people kind of get into the groove of it. One of the things I've heard a lot about is like, I'm just sick of redundant meetings. There's all these meetings everywhere, and then they go to something like the Scrum methodology where they're doing quick daily stand-ups, and they're actually finding that it's saving them a lot of times and minimizing meetings elsewhere. And so it doesn't have to be the whole thing at the start. It can be an implementation of something like a task management board, or using something as simple as something like Trello, where you're actually starting to manage these kind of daily tasks, implement them, have your daily stand up, know where everyone's at, and then kind of as you're progressing through this, you'll find that it's probably useful in other areas as well. And none of this necessarily needs to tie back into like IT operations, or unlike DevOps, which is actually quite particular to those IT industries. And Agile might have come out of a software engineering, but it is a methodology for working as a team and for a particular approach for problem solving and getting some kind of outcome or delivery. So any project where you really have something that you're trying to deliver, whether it be marketing materials, whether it be some kind of prototype that you're trying to put out, it doesn't really need to be based in that IT in order for your organization to actually adopt some of these Agile methodologies.
Yeah, great. And I think, Trent, you were saying when we were chatting before the call, you've actually seen this sort of deploy in some groups outside of sort of software. Is there an example you could talk to where you've seen it, and maybe the different sort of approaches that those teams took when adopting?
Yeah, so one of the interesting spaces that I saw this operate was in a policy team for government, and they were actually writing policy in Scrum sprints, and looking at going, what's the minimum viable sort of policy that we can produce in this 2-week period? How can we produce something of value in a policy document within this? And then using that sort of Scrum framework and cycle to go, okay, let's sit down at the start and plan out, where are we going to be in 2 weeks' time, and what are we going to show to our customers, whoever that might be, in 2 weeks' time, the value that we've created. And it gave them, you know, rather than thinking about, okay, this is a policy that doesn't have to be implemented for another 18 months, and, you know, trying to work, it was going, okay, well, how can we start delivering incrementally and providing value on it sort of in 2 weeks' time? And the buy-in that got from the business and customer area was, you know, exponential in terms of going, this is great. We're loving, you know, being engaged with the policy area, because we can see the policy being written as it's written, not getting a document dumped on our desk in, you know, 18 months time that we can't then look at iterating with them or working with them. We're going, we're here working the policy with you. So, you know, that sort of ability to engage and collaborate with your customers is something that I find, you know, really wonderful about the Scrum framework.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a great example of, like, essentially where they're somewhat providing value to their internal customer, which is the other parts of the business. So yeah, great example. And I think probably I know we've got a mix of attendees on the call today, the webinar today. So yeah, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat anytime. We're going to jump into a little bit on DevOps now, because that's often brought up in a similar context to Agile, and I just want to sort of help draw some distinctions. So before we do that, I've got another poll for those who have heard about DevOps. If we can just throw that on. So keen to get some more answers here on where you, if you do run DevOps, and this will have a more generally technology focus, IT focus, but whether you have a set of independent development, operations, and QA teams, or whether you do have agile teams and starting to automate your builds and testing as part of your development process, or whether you actually have a full DevOps practice and integrated tool chains. So just keen to see results here to sort of guide some of the discussion of the next questions we have. So just give a few seconds for that. Then we'll jump into, okay, so it's actually a bit of a mix. So we've actually got a lot there in the middle as well, where it looks like some people are on their DevOps journey through to automating builds and testing, which we'll get into a bit more detail in a moment. So maybe we'll jump in. Sean, we've got a slide on this, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts based on some of your developer experience and how we sort of distinguish DevOps to Agile in terms of some of those practices and approaches.
Yeah, sure. So I might just start with how they're kind of similar, and I guess this slide speaks to it, is they both have some kind of feedback loop mechanism in them in order for it to kind of be iterative and kind of continue rolling as the project goes. And you find yourself in these kind of little feedback loops from build, deploying, and testing. One of the main differences you see is that DevOps really is focused on that IT side. So while Agile and something like Scrum can be used outside of the IT environment, DevOps really has the focus on bringing your development team and your operations team together. And what this can often look like is making sure that you know, when you're pushing or when you're deploying whatever kind of application it is that you've got, that you start to automate that kind of you know, from coding to building, testing, releasing, and monitoring, and then looping that back in. And I'd say where they kind of overlap or kind of touch each other is really in that kind of planning and coding stage. That's kind of where you'll see a bit of integration between the Agile and the DevOps. So you're planning, you might be using a similar tool. You might be using something like Bitbucket or Jira, and have a connection between those two, which probably leads back to your Agile Kanban boards. But then from that, those tools will then also take on a bit of a life of their own, in that you will start to automate processes in that. So, you know, as Warren said before, maybe grey hair isn't such a bad thing, mate. Back when we didn't have any of this DevOps stuff and it wasn't really popular, you know, pushing something to a server was ultra stressful, and you had all these manual processes. You're often relying on one sysadmin to actually go and try and deploy and push something to production, and it often broke. And so what this approach tries to do is tries to bring in some kind of tool chain, so that rather than having a person who's that kind of go-to, but also a single point of failure, you're actually pushing all that work to something that's a bit more automated. So it is a bit more auditable. You can go back in and you can check, okay, well, what are the processes? You can make sure that the tests are being run before you're pushing any code to that production environment. And then you're monitoring it on the other side. And it's particularly pushing all this to some kind of automation tools where you have control and consistency. And consistency is a big part, because while you're running that loop, if you want to make one change, say your introduction of a new library, that actually becomes part of that pipeline within that DevOps process, rather than that single point of failure, that one person having to know that that library has been updated on which server and how to operate it. And so pushing all that really into that development pipeline really helps with continually pushing out changes. And what ends up happening is you see that your actual product or whatever is on production is continually being updated with these kind of smaller changes, and it really opens you up to having less critical issues that are going to that are related to those kind of big feature pushes and stuff like that. And so you see this continuous integration and continuous testing, monitoring, and that kind of small feedback loop really helps with making those changes.
Yeah, cool. And I think I want to sort of take two things there, which I think is really the ultimate benefit is around speed and quality. I mean, there's numerous others as well, but Trent, maybe you can talk around how the I guess the importance, the benefit of having a mature DevOps practice supports a broader agile approach for a business, and sort of what that means for customers at the end of the day.
And so I think that the key thing that you pointed there to is that customer and that value for customer. And Warren touched on it at the start. Sean's talked to it as well. And Agile and DevOps. While DevOps is still talking to potentially some of the more technical aspects, it's still got the customer at the heart and in mind at the end of the day, and saying, how do we get a higher quality product to them faster? How are we more responsive? And ultimately, how does that help us be successful and better at what we do? And then, coming back, because I love the culture and people side of things as well. And Sean mentioned it. My people are happier. They're not stressed out day in, day out. Merging code and dealing with conflicts and fighting fires constantly. They're getting to do great, wonderful features and do awesome things with their customers and be engaged and collaborate with their customers and be able to provide a great quality service. People come to work, being able to do the best that they can each day by implementing some of these practices, and ultimately that drives, happy customers.
Yeah, fantastic. And Warren, what's your view here in terms of the, I guess, industry at large here for those that are developing DevOps practices versus those that aren't? Like, what's the real, what are you seeing? You're seeing the adoption. I mean, DevOps been around for a while now. Is it really leaving those who don't have a DevOps practice behind?
Look, I would think so, and I think you'd find that most organisations at least put a toe in the water in terms of DevOps. I think there's still a variety of different approaches that organisations are taking. Some much more embracing it. I guess the concept about DevOps being a coming together of dev and operations, rather than being a new team that we set up to develop maybe some automation. So taking where development's taking ownership around some of the operational metrics and being able to support the software that they're pushing out into the world. I think there's a few drivers around the adoption. I think cloud first. Most people are going towards a cloud based approach. So I think that's definitely driving some changes. I think the fact that we've moved away from those monolithic sort of architecture applications towards microservices and things like that is driving people towards DevOps as well. And I think, and we've said it a few times now, Agile is making that change. And if I think about, how do we get something from, idea all the way out to, to our market, or from concept all the way through to cash, right? We have to go through an ideation aspect, an area that we're not necessarily touching on today. We have to go through, the actual development of that capability, and that's what we're talking about in terms of Agile and practices like Scrum, where we're able to develop things on an iterative basis. But if we develop it on an iterative basis and we've got the value there ready, that latent value there ready, but we can't push it out to our customer, then it's really, a bit of a exercise in futility, really. So we need to make sure that we're able to deliver that functionality in as quick a time frame as we can to our customers to really get that value that it represents. So I think, definitely organizations are looking at DevOps for those reasons. I think, when I think back, and just to give you an example based on, that idea about how long it might take people to get software out into the real world, if I think about a financial services organization that I dealt with recently, and they were looking at their cycle time at all the various phases of that concept through to cash sort of life cycle. They were very good at doing everything until they got to that last bit, and then they might have been 3, they might have been 6 months down the track before they were actually able to deliver that functionality. So yeah, look, I think most organizations are probably in that 1 to 5 year sort of time frame in terms of DevOps. Again, some have embraced it a little bit more, the idea or the concept of DevOps than others. But definitely, I think most people recognize the value that it represents.
Yeah, great. And that's probably a good segue into our next sort of section as we sort of get into, I guess, the tools of the trade here. There's plenty of options from numerous sort of software vendors, and I'm sure a lot of our collective clients are using different types of tools with different integrations. And again, there's probably a subset I'm still sure who are working in Excel and doing basics there. So when it comes to I guess supporting agile change at an organization, when is the right time to bring in the tooling, Warren? Like, where does that fit in the mix? And thinking about the different types of tooling.
Look, I think tooling, and look, I'm a tool guy, so let me be very open and honest about that. So I'm definitely going to say it's important. The tool isn't going to do the work for you. It's not going to transform your business, right? It's there to support the transformation. So I think that's very important. So you need to have, I would probably look at it from my sort of perspective when I'm talking to a customer and going, okay, is this right for this customer at this point in time to adopt our tooling? I'm looking at probably some key things around executive support. Is there executive sponsorship around this? Is there a transformation either that's been completed or that's in play? There needs to be a desire to change the organization. The tool won't make that change occur. Is there a center of excellence that can drive that consistency, the processes around being able to do things across the organization? And then, and particularly at my sort of area of expertise now is around scaling Agile at that organizational level. Have they looked at adopting a particular framework? It's not about the framework, so it doesn't really matter which framework we're adopting, and it may even be your own framework you're in-house developed sort of framework. But having something that's going to set some guardrails in place and provide some guidance across the organization is very important. So I think they're really important things for me to see, and then that makes me think that, okay, now's the time to be looking at the tooling that's going to support that endeavor. So definitely I wouldn't be waiting for it all to happen and then adopt the tooling. You want, most of the time the tooling will support you in the endeavor, but it definitely won't drive it.
And how do you look at it from, I guess, a stack? So you've got teams running their sprint cycles at a sort of task level. Maybe they're using like a Jira, versus then through to the executive or a steering committee who maybe wanting to really know what's going on as part of that reporting and governance mechanisms, but not want to get stuck into the weeds of the granular task level. Like, how do you look at that in terms of deploying it, or yeah, maybe you can just talk to that for a little bit.
Yeah, look, so I think it's worthwhile sort of thinking about the history of Agile adoption. I think when we look at most organizations today, we're really good at being Agile at the team level. Practice like Scrum have been around for quite some time, and the teams have got really good at making it sort of planning out for what they're going to deliver, and within that incremental time box, being able to deliver that in a fairly predictable way. And that's really what we're trying to do, is be very predictable. Not so much going faster. Fast is nice, but being predictable is very good. Now, what's happened though is there tends to be a little bit of a disconnect then between what's going on at those higher organizational levels and what's going on at the team level. So while Agile is about sort of transparency and openness, unfortunately, I guess what's happened is, the teams have gone off and been very good at doing their thing. The higher level sort of organization is very good at planning their strategy and what their objectives are, but there's this like disconnect where we're not necessarily driving the right things at the team level. We're not necessarily pointing the teams at the right level. And that's not the team's fault. It's because of that disconnect that's occurred. So, so definitely there's some great team tools out there. Pushing the Atlassian banner. Jira, is a great solution out there for teams to adopt Agile practices at that team level. But then you want to be able to actually be able to plan from a top-down perspective, and then have that visibility and transparency from a bottom-up perspective. So if we think about it, I'll give you a very generic sort of view of an organization, but at a enterprise level, we want to be defining what are the business outcomes we want to achieve. What do we want to do as an organization? Now that might be to move into a different market. It might be to increase our presence in a certain market. It might be, to make more money in a certain area. Lots of sort of things like that. And it tends to be, I can go and look at a website of an organization today, and I can pull out those key things out of the annual report. The chairman will be saying it, or the CEO will be saying those things. Very easy to know what the business is trying to achieve. But what happens is that doesn't necessarily cascade down. What we want to do now is want to start from a portfolio perspective, is looking up at those outcomes we're trying to achieve and going, what's the work that we can deliver that's going to achieve those? So it's really a coming together of business and technology. So business saying, this is what I want to do, and technology saying, well, I can do this, and hopefully that will drive that outcome for you. And so we want to have that work being identified, and we want to be able to define that within our tooling, so we can see that logical connection between the outcome and the outputs. And then we want to actually cascade that work down to our teams within their team tooling, and then do their work around decomposing that work and then starting to execute against that. And then we want that status information to flow back up the organization. And then that's going to enable us to make those really key decisions around whether we halt, pivot, or persevere in terms of our investments. So, really key to have that connection, both from a planning perspective, pushing that understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing things down to the team level, and then having that status information flowing back up, and so we can make informed decisions at each level of scale within the organization.
And I think that probably talks to, I guess, the maturity of some of these cloud-based products, where you can get those tight integrations from that base sort of task level all the way up now to the program and portfolio view. So there isn't that disconnect, and I guess you're even then reducing the amount of sort of manual reporting a program manager or a project manager may be doing at that level, due to that gap in terms of what's going back up linked to the strategic objectives.
Yeah, definitely. The tooling's out there, and Jira Align being one of those platforms that will support that. I guess, and I started off talking about how we've been very good at the team level of doing things in an agile manner. That hasn't necessarily percolated up the levels of the hierarchy. So we still may be planning at a portfolio level or an enterprise level on an annual basis, as an example. But I am starting to see, there's new ways of working, sort of feeding in, where the business starting to come to technology and looking at things in a much more iterative fashion and a much more outcome-driven fashion as well. So, but there does tend to be, especially in, some of the more sort of, longer term sort of organizations, still being very traditional practices at those higher levels of scale, where there ends up being a little bit of a disconnect. I think we have to recognize that we are still very much in a bimodal organizations in most cases today, but that pendulum is definitely flipping towards the agile side. And as that happens, then we get that value from taking that new approach.
And Trent, I want to get you to jump in here. So where do you see the tools sort of fit into that kind of rollout or adoption of Agile in some of the work that you do? You'll often hear, at the beginning of these kind of initiatives, there'll be maybe a few people in the room. It's like, what tools are we getting? But how do you sort of make that sort of fit in terms of the behavior change, the mindset, the principle approach with the supporting technology behind it?
Yeah, I think Warren pointed out really nicely in terms of there's a lot of really good stuff happening at the team level, and the tools and what they can produce in terms of the team getting insight and awareness as to how they're progressing and how they're tracking is really being utilized heavily. What we tend to find is that as you move up those layers in the organization, is there's still a lot of traditional governance, traditional strategic kind of views and plannings, and there's not being a full utilization of being able to look at these tools and look at how they can actually reduce some of those governance pressures or reduce some of those other overheads that the organisation is used to having to produce. And so there's a real kind of, once again, there's a real kind of culture piece around that as part of this, going, well, how are we going to look at our governance structures? How are we going to look at our reporting structures in terms of taking on these tools? And are we going to have all these tools at our disposal, but then not utilize all this additional value that they can provide in terms of creating alignment right through from our strategy to how it's being delivered on the ground on a day-to-day basis? Or are we going to still have to have people, interpreting these results and providing reports and adhering to governance documents that's not necessarily adding as much value as what it could be looking directly into the tools if we knew how to interpret the data and use those leading indicators that they can provide within it?
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's definitely sort of getting that dynamic sort of status snapshot at any point in time, which is a huge value adder that I've seen in sort of where you've got an integrated approach from sort of bottom up. Sean, I want to just get your view as well, just as we wrap up this session, a little bit sort of deeper in the stack, I guess, on the DevOps tool chain. Like, what do you sort of see how that's evolving? Where do people typically start? Yeah, your views.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Trent mentioned before that like everyone gets excited about tools, and I think particularly in DevOps, it's one of those things where you can get really lost in the jungle. There is a tool for absolutely everything, from every part in that kind of loop. There's a multitude of tools. Like you could probably find at least 100 for each part. If it's at the start and you're just looking at, initially taking on a DevOps toolchain, then you'll probably find that some of the tools that you're already using probably provide enough to at least get that basic framework. So, I'll name drop a few Atlassian products for Warren here, but some of the tool chains that I've used, I haven't come across a development team, in a very long time that isn't using some kind of code repository. And, I've used a lot of starting with something like Bitbucket, and maybe even a step back and touching on that Agile. You might have something like Jira, where you're doing your task management in there, and that actually has a lot of connection then with something like Bitbucket, and then you're able to create branches in your code repository which relate back to those kind of task items. Once you've finished that task and put in your code into Bitbucket, and GitHub also has a lot of similar functionality in this way, you're able to then set up a kind of pipeline, and so that every time you are committing your code, Bitbucket or GitHub, I mean AWS has their own as well, will actually take that pipeline, and you're able to set up the build process within that tool so that it does it automatically when you're submitting, an end of a feature or something like that. And then once it does build successfully, then within these same tools, you're then able to run your tests, and you are able to then run your deployment as well. And so you can have, from one commit of code into the repository, you can have it going through building, testing, and deploying all through just one tool. And while you can find a multitude of plugins and kind of other tools that you could be using it, if you're at that initial stage, really you can just jump into those tools you already have and make the most out of them to start. I guess the other kind of parts of that are around monitoring, and you have things like Opsgenie or Status Page from Atlassian, which you can use to then monitor those. And so really with a small amount of tools, you can get most of this DevOps stuff, at least in its initial phase, and then start adding tools as you find a need. You might find that there's a particular need for your team to be monitoring something specifically, and you can go and find a tool for that and plug that back into your tool chain. There are a few others that will actually take a lot of the work off you. One of the ones that I've used was AWS Beanstalk, where it will spin up the instances and kind of deploy your app, and it's quite hands-off. So there is a lot of noise out there in terms of what tooling should you use, but I'd start say just start with the basics and then kind of build on that. And as your developers or whoever it is in your technical team start to need something in particular, then go and find a tool for that.
Yeah, cool. So look, I think that's we're just getting towards the end of our discussion. We've had a pretty broad touch on sort of Agile and DevOps and practices and tooling, which has been really great to hear everyone's views. Just as we sort of wrap up, I'm keen to sort of hear any Warren books, things, people you've sort of gone to in the past for amazing insights. Any recommendations you want to share with those on the webinar today?
Look, let me. I'm sitting at my desk, so I've got a couple of books here. Probably they're not sort of recent books as such, and to some extent they're a little bit, especially this first one. It talks about mainly the changing market, the changing landscape we have. So I find Big Bang Disruption is just a really good read. It's really interesting, the sort of some of the historical case studies that it talks to and things. So again, a little bit older, but great book to read. What else have I got here? One that again would be probably, I don't know, I'd have to guess it might be 5 years old now, but The Lean Enterprise is a good book to look at as well. So could be a little bit of a dry read at times, but definitely interesting and definitely touches on both the Agile and the DevOps space that we spoke about today.
Yeah. And Warren, where can we follow you, find out more about you, keep in touch with you?
So LinkedIn, feel free, if anything I've said today has interested you, then feel free to connect up to me on LinkedIn. So Warren Jones, Atlassian, shouldn't be too hard to find, albeit that it's a pretty common name. I'd welcome any sort of anybody connect to me through LinkedIn. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Warren. Trent, any books front of mind or any classics in your library?
Yes. Now I don't have the wonderful performance that Warren had there to actually show it to you with the cover and everything. So you've put us under the pump now, Warren. Look, I think looking at that holistic kind of Agile sense across organizations, I think you brought it up before, The Age of Agile by Steve Denning is quite a good book to get an understanding of looking at Agile broader than just at the team level. And there's also Better Value, Sooner, Safer, Happier by John Smart, which is really talking about transformations and how that sort of can come about organically with an Agile, I guess, flavor, principles and values to it. So I guess they'd be two that I'd be recommending people have a bit of a look at if they want to dive into that space.
Yeah, brilliant. And where can people follow, connect with you, Trent?
Yep, so similar to Warren, LinkedIn, Trent Mason, Centify. It shouldn't be too hard to find. Also, there's probably a bit of information there on our website, www.centify.co, so just CO.
Awesome, thank you, Trent. And Sean?
So probably particular, I'll talk maybe to the DevOps side. If you're already using a tool, you're using something like Bitbucket, then most of these vendors actually have really great online resources about how to start incorporating DevOps and incorporating their tool chain. and they often have a lot of really nice examples and are able to actually just guide you through their own tool and how to integrate into this. So, you know, if you're using something like the Atlassian stack, or you're already using Jira, then you can find a lot of good information on their site. If you're using, you know, some AWS tools, you can start looking at like maybe code pipeline and then kind of go from there. But I find a lot of those online resources are really good for getting those hands-on examples and then kind of working that into your tool chain.
Awesome. And where can people connect with you, follow you?
Yeah, Sean Bettridge on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out or just simply add me and keep in touch.
Cool. And look, I'm going to plug a little book while I got the microphone here. The Age of Agile, as Trent mentioned. I've also found the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim. I'm not sure if anyone's read that, but it's a really good sort of business fable of a DevOps adoption, which I thought was an easy way to sort of get into understanding how the practice is adopted by organizations. So I'll just plug that one. But look, we've come to the end of our discussion. It's gone quick. I'm not sure if there's any. I don't think we've had too many questions come through. But whilst we just wait, if any do pop in, we do have a couple of more webinars in this Nextgen series. The next one coming up in June on using emerging technologies to build core capabilities, and then we've got a data analytics focus on compliance costs, which is a bit of a hot one, particularly for firms in financial services at the moment. That's coming up in July. So you can find more or links to those on the URL there in this deck, and we'll send that out shortly to the attendees registrations for this event. But I just want to thank Sean, Trent, Warren for your time today. It's been a great discussion, and please do reach out to anyone here on the panel. Our contact details will be in the deck as well. So yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for their time, and hope everyone has a good break over Easter as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Ryan, and happy Easter all.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Ryan, and thank you all. Hope it was good.
Cheers, everyone.